All right, we are talking today to business owners, entrepreneurs who might be in a growth phase of their business and might be considering the location and the property where their business operates and whether or not owning that building or leasing or being property manager or renting, et cetera, how they maximize the actual facility that their business operates in. And so we're going to talk about some of the common questions and maybe give some tips and tricks and ideas to consider for our business owners. So Jeremiah, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, I think sometimes people come to us with an idea, or we feel the question of, well, shouldn't I just own the building? Shouldn't I buy the building? And the answer is maybe, perhaps it's even probably. But we want to look at it. We want to understand what are we building? Where are we headed? So we're kind of like the thought process that we would run through to should my business own a building? And at the very top, I'm just going to make a comment on the legal side. As everyone knows, this isn't legal advice. This isn't financial advice. This is for educational purposes. Very likely, your corporation, business, operating entity should not own the real estate. You should own a separate LLC. So we're not talking about should my business buy this. We're talking about you as an owner. Should you have not only your operating business, but should you also purchase the real estate that your business operates in, and how should you structure that? So the legal side of how do you structure that's probably another episode. And we've talked about that in the past. But for this one, we're saying, well, should I even consider buying a building? Should I own the space that I operate out of?
I think one of the first questions to ask is like whether or not you actually like the facility that you're currently operating in. Is it functional? And do you foresee being able to grow or expand within that current footprint? You might be considering expanding your business into other geographies or physically just expanding the current business model that you have exactly where it is. So can that space accommodate your business as it grows? And is it a good neighborhood to invest in? Is it easy to access for your employees, right? Does it work well for the current business that you have?
Laura, I think it's a great place to start with because I think people sometimes assume I have it, therefore it must be great. But to really think critically, is the age of the building, the infrastructure of the building, is this going to serve where I'm headed? Is this going to serve the future? And there's a number of folks who will overbuy a building, like get a building that's too large for them and get a subtenant, get someone else that's taking over part of it so that you can grow at a normal pace, but eventually you can plan to take over the entire building into the future. No right or wrong in that, but it's just a thought to say, what is the building now? And what do I think I'm going to need in the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years? Is this still a good fit for me?
And when you think about the economic development of the city that your business is located in, I think it's critical to think about how that neighborhood might expand or change. We have good friends of ours that run a commercial real estate brokerage firm here, and they've connected us with different committees. We participate in some committees locally that talk about the economic development in the town that we operate in. And that's so helpful because if you're considering owning real estate, it's an investment in your community and specifically in that area of town. So if they're looking to expand, is it going to be other retail space, business space, residential? How might that impact the traffic, parking, right? The environment, the safety of where your business operates. So I would highly recommend being in touch with, even volunteering, participating. A lot of this news and information is available, but you have to seek it out in terms of the economic development plans for your city.
Yeah. And if you've identified, hey, this is a great building, it's in a great location, the reason that a lot of people think of buying the real estate is usually the control to say, I don't want to have to renegotiate my lease and have all my expenses go up on me. The other reason is people, when they think on the personal side, they say, well, I'm just paying rent to somebody else every month. What if I was paying that rent to myself? Wouldn't that be a benefit to my future? And both those are generally true to say you can have a little better control over your space and your environment, and you can be paying that rent to yourself as the owner. Even on a personal sense, we are operating the building. We've been in here for decades in the same building, and we've wanted to buy it. We've attempted to buy this building, but the landlords are very happy, keeping it. So for us, we came to the point of we could either move or we could remain as tenants. And in our situation, we decided to remain as tenants. We like the location we're at. We like the building we're in. We decided not to move. But that was a conversation that we've been through a number of times over the years, and even approached the landlord a number of times to see if that was an opportunity or not.
And a somewhat unique opportunity, but I'll mention it to our listeners, was we had the opportunity to act as property managers. So it doesn't give us full discretion over new tenants or occupancy, but it does give us at least a say and participation in who our neighbors are and how we get to serve them by taking care of the building. And that has led to some really wonderful partnerships. So we get to serve in that role as property manager, and that might be kind of unique. But before we're ready ready or it's available to purchase a building, that's been kind of a great role that we get to play and gives us some of the benefit of participating in what other occupants and our neighbors will be, and also being able to negotiate some longer term lease contracts as well, which has been helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. So kind of the second item we talked about, should I own it? Why do people want to own it? The second one is what are the tax benefits? And this is often where the conversation leads. We start talking a little bit about taxes. The key ones off the top, you're going to get some depreciation when you buy the building. You're probably going to get some interest expense from what you're spending for a mortgage. And you have the opportunity for things like 1031 exchanges, like kind of exchanges. There's some other things you can do in the future. And we've had other episodes on what a 1031 exchange is. But
Mhm.
with that, just the idea that say, not only do you get to start paying yourself as your own landlord, but now you're going to have some tax benefits of buying the building that you may not have had the opportunity to if you didn't own the real estate. So
Yeah.
depreciation is a big one. As most people know, you can take commercial property and depreciate it over 39 years. And so you get some portion of what you use to buy the money. You get that as depreciation each year. And it usually provides some immediate tax savings. I always caution people, over the long run, the reason you get depreciation is because you have to replace things. You have to change roofs. You have to redo the HVAC. You have to redo parking lots. So it's not free money. You're going to have to put that into the building over time. But the tax code allows you to take some depreciation, which on the front end can be very helpful to kind of put you in a different tax position as you move forward. And that's a great one to run by your CPA to say, hey, I'm considering this building. What would this do or what would this not do for me? And to really have them highlight what that benefit may or may not be for your specific situation. But super helpful to consider.
Yeah, as a general comment, when we talk about taxes, as an investor, whether you're talking about real estate or another type of investment, level one is ultimately trying to identify what the potential performance might be of that investment. But level two, a more sophisticated investor is looking at the after tax benefit. So when we're talking about real estate, there might be some nuances and some tax benefits that are specific to holding this type of asset within your portfolio. The disclaimer I want to put out there to our listeners is that tax laws change all the time. So even we don't want to get too detailed because we never know when those tax laws are going to change. And so it's one of those areas that we always want to be up to date and delivering the most accurate information to our clients. But overall, when you're evaluating any sort of investment, you want to be looking at the after tax potential return rather than just the total performance of that investment.
Right. That's a great pivot, Laura, when you say that of we're talking about a business owner. This is also just regular investors. I think regular investors who are considering adding real estate holdings to where they hold their assets, these are the same questions. Is this a good
Mhm.
neighborhood? Is this fit with my long-term goals? Will I benefit from some of this depreciation? And Laura, here's, understanding what's the net return here after taxes, after my borrowing costs. Is this going to bring in? And I think that's a key distinction that even a business owner should think of this as an investor. Do I want to add this to what I'm about? Do I want to add this to what I'm doing? The biggest difference is that the business owner also has the tenant, right? They're automatically
Mhm.
the tenant. But I think the actual purchasing the building is a great moment where those are very similar, whether you're the owner or just an
Mhm.
investor.
We work a lot with clients that have quite a robust real estate portfolio. And sometimes we get this question like, how much real estate is too much real
Mm,
estate? And what I think is interesting is when we enter into those conversations, oftentimes there's some history that plays into it for all of us. We arrive at kind of our own financial bias, a lot of times informed on how we're raised. But I hear often like, oh, maybe my a parent lost some money on the stock market and so they chose to start investing in real
mm,
estate, or that was a part of the industry either that the client was a part of or that their family was a part of, and so they just continued to invest in real estate. So there's typically a level of comfort with investing in real estate, and so oftentimes what we see is somebody who might be over invested in real estate. Now that specific number and percentage varies depending on the client portfolio, but what we talk about when we're thinking about overall diversification within asset class within a portfolio is looking at the different risks that might be associated. So there are many benefits to diversification and holding different asset class. There are always associated risks. Some of those are quantifiable as we look at some of those measurements like standard deviation and market trends and returns over time and historical information. All of that, right, helps us inform some of those assessments that we make. But oftentimes for the individual, they hold emotionally a level of risk in what type of
mm.
investments they hold. I just want to highlight that when we're talking about real estate, one of the main risks that we always want to evaluate is liquidity. or illiquidity. And so real estate has a tendency to be a fairly illiquid asset. Now, typically, if you're receiving rent, right, it might provide kind of a consistent cash flow. But if you had to access the equity or access the value, the asset that you hold within real estate, it's not something that you can do most often in less than 30 days, right? And so when we look at the overall portfolio, that's one thing when you're considering how much real estate should I hold within my portfolio. One of the primary risks that we look at is liquidity.
Yep, that's great. And I think with a business owner, as you look at that liquidity, it's also looking at your industry that you operate your business in and what real estate you own and how flexible those two are. For example, if someone were to run a restaurant and they have a great downtown location, they buy the building, they own it, and they're operating as a restaurant in that space. If for some reason that downtown area or that section starts having problems and trouble and restaurants are failing, move your business and replace it with another business that's the exact same as you may be very difficult. Even though they're different asset classes, they're actually kind of tied together because they're really only set up for the use as a restaurant. We can compare that to someone who has kind of a generic warehouse that they're operating out of. If for some reason their business wasn't doing well selling, say, furniture, they could pivot and someone else who does logistics could come in there and take that space. And so then you have a real estate asset and a business asset that are actually diversified from each other. And if one's not doing well, there's some ability to pivot with the other. So I think that's a thought too for a lot of different industries. Like, for example, our business just uses office space. It's fairly generic that a lot of people could use that for a lot of uses. And so for us to buy a building, it would not be a single use tied together. They're two separate assets. But I think it's good for every business to consider is the real estate that you're buying, is it also now tied to your industry? Or is it really a
Hmm.
diversification from your industry? And if you had to move or downsize your business, you could pull somebody else in there that might be thriving and really have two pieces. So I think
Yeah.
diversification is an interesting idea. And it takes a little bit of thinking to
Yep.
say, are these two assets tied together or are they actually diversified?
Yeah, and you need to look at proper zoning requirements, what's available adjacent to that, what would really make sense. So there's a little bit more research to be done beyond just kind of your own personal opinion on the use of the space. You want to research that a little bit more. But I love that differentiation between is the building itself and the type of business that could operate in the building. Are those also representing additional diversification or are they always paired or married together? So I
Well,
love
even
that.
just telling a story, we had someone that we were potentially going to work with, and they had run a business for a number of years. But that time, that business had bought its own building and had paid the rent and paid the mortgage, and it got to a point where they'd paid off the mortgage of their building, and they still had their business. So they had these two assets that were available. But as it turned out, the building was worth significantly more than the business as a something they could sell as they're getting ready to retire. And so there's just an interesting comment that the business kind of just helped build up this real estate asset over time. And then that's what
Mhm,
they're actually able to hold on to when they sold the business and just kind of exited without a big
mhm,
payday. They now became a landlord and they came into a next season of their business. So it's interesting
mhm,
to think of, businesses are operating and some businesses are great to exit. You can sell them, you can build them up and sell them for value. Others, once you stop operating, it's not that useful. It's not that sellable.
mm.
But could that be used to build up your real estate in the meantime? That's part of a
Yeah.
long-term planning.
I think that goes back to our first topic about some of those things that you want to consider early on when you're thinking about owning commercial real estate. If it's special to the business that you operate, but in the long term, as you think about those assets separately, the succession plan or strategy that you have for your business might be different from the commercial real estate that you own. And can you foresee yourself stepping into that role as landlord? Or would you have someone else, like a property manager, manage that space for you? There's a myriad of different options available, but something to be considered early on as you consider purchasing additional property.
That's right. So last one I think we'll talk about is commercial real estate truly passive? I think there's some ideas that people have that if they're going to buy a building, they'll just sit by the mailbox and collect rents. Or if they're going to add it to their business, they don't need to add any more skill sets or abilities. They just are going to operate there and it'll be easy. And there's some things where a company can absorb what they were doing anyways as a tenant. But for most people, you kind of have to be prepared that to own commercial real estate requires maintenance. It requires updates. It requires repair. And whether you do that through a property manager, whether you do that yourselves, there's some dynamics there that you need to look into. So I think it's a misnomer to think, oh, I'm just going to buy this and it'll be great and it'll be easy. there's physical repairs. There's also negotiations with the tenants. There's also, like Laura, you mentioned earlier, use with the city, what's appropriate, what's
Mhm.
permitted. All that comes into play. And they're not necessarily overly difficult. It's just something not to ignore and to know that this will
Mhm.
need to get done.
We kinda have a joke around the office as we get to play that role of property manager about, sometimes you have days where you feel like you're, putting out fires right and left. Well, sometimes literally, quite literally, as a property manager, there might be fires in your day. And so you
Mhm.
want to make sure that you have, the right infrastructure in place to be able to respond to urgent needs. So it's no small task, but the overall benefit might be there for you. And it's just something to consider when you look at the overall cost benefit analysis. So when we get back to that idea of, is real estate truly passive income? You're talking about kind of the active role that you need to play in managing the property, but there's other factors to consider there too when you think about cash flow and what that might do personally for you. So now we're not talking about just the corporation, what's appropriate for the business to own, like you said at the very beginning. We're actually talking about you as an individual adding this asset to your portfolio and what that might represent for you over the long term, even long after you've exited the actual business. There might be great residual passive income that could come to you as a benefit from owning the property.
Absolutely. And there's a scenario that we see on a regular basis is when you have a kind of a family business. So, a parent generation started a business, the next generation decides to work in it, and they have this great camaraderie. They're working well together. Some families, can't do that. But say they have, we've had a number of clients that multi generations are working in the business. Well, sometimes when the parent generation is ready to exit, there needs to be a large capital transition and take on big loans to be able to buy out mom and dad. We've had other businesses where mom and dad simply keep the real estate that's already been purchased over the years, and they're able to sell the business to not a huge cost to the next generation, knowing that as landlords, they're going to keep receiving rent for many years to come. And we've had a few transitions we've done with clients where the parent generation, remains as a landlord, and they have this nice steady flow of income, and the younger generation taking over the operating business doesn't really feel a big change in the numbers in the books because the money is still paying rent and they're still able to take salaries, and it works out really well for these long-term multi-generational planning structures. So it's just one more layer to consider, that if you are potentially going to have other family members work in the business, it might be something to all the more consider. If you own your business, if you own the real estate, would that be a way to allow one generation to somewhat exit and hand the reins to the next
Mhm.
generation, but still have that flow of income that's
Mhm.
useful and potentially even needed.
Mhm.
So it goes a long way in having multiple assets for family
Yeah.
businesses.
And, I kind of want to go back to the earlier point, which is like you don't want to underestimate the amount of time and attention that might be required to own property. And especially as you think about the transition of an asset from one generation to the other, how there might be some training because just as you age, buildings
Mm,
age as well. And so there might be some capital improvements that are necessary. And so some of those bigger decisions that you might be anticipating to put on the next generation, those who will inherit it, there's going to be some training or some handoff that might be required, or that might present an opportunity to look at something like a 1031 exchange where you evaluate a certain property and maybe roll it over into another property, etc. We won't get into the details of 1031 exchange, but something to consider if you're viewing the ownership of property as potentially a legacy asset to pass on to the next generation. Is there an interest or is there a capability in that next generation to also step into that role of property management, making some of those bigger decisions that might be needed?
yeah. I think even zooming back, the idea of what's the long term play? What's the long term plan? Buying a building in my mind is not a 6 month or a 1 year plan, right? This is a longer term step you're taking for your business, for your family, for your future, and to really understand, okay, will this build what I want to build? Is it the right size and shape and strategy for my business? But then also, does it fit with the kind of the larger personal plans that I have and where I want to get to? And we see real estate as a phenomenal asset to add to an already robust business and asset portfolio, but it needs to fit, and it needs to fit in a way that makes sense
Mhm.
for where that person's going. And that, to me, that just takes some planning. It doesn't have to be, we don't know the future, it doesn't have to have everything dialed in, but it does need a clear vision, a clear direction to see, does
Mhm.
this fit with where I'm going? And if it does, now that's when you bring on professionals to say, okay, let's find the right building, let's find the right
Mhm.
financing, let's get the right tax advice to really build your future.
So we've covered off several topics. We've talked about your overall goal in terms of owning commercial real estate. We want to make sure that it's aligned with your broader personal financial goals. We talked about some of the risk involved. And so just to be aware of those going in it, and that the purchase of commercial real estate has to do with kind of a long-term, sophisticated investor mindset and looking at that after-tax return. So lots of different topics involved, but we hope this content has been helpful for our listeners. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We love having these conversations with our clients.
Until next week, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thanks for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit trichordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@trichordadvisors.com or simply click on the link in the show notes.
We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Trichord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.